Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. A very warm welcome to you all from a very cold Nairobi. We are glad you could join us today for this policy dialogue. My name is Doreen Odongo, and I am your moderator for today. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear from wherever you are. Great, I can see a few people smiling, and so I will take that as a yes, that you can hear me loud and clear. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or morning, wherever you are joining us from. As I mentioned, my name is Doreen Odongo. I work with African Women in Agricultural Research and Development Award. Award is hosted by the World Agroforestry based in Nairobi, Kenya. This afternoon, we are having a conversation on the role of policies in fostering gender responsive agricultural food systems in Africa. And so we have lined up a few speakers with whom we are going to be having this conversation. But of course, this conversation cannot be complete without you, our attendees. And so we thank you so much for joining us, and we invite you to participate in the conversation. Before we officially start the program, I'd like to give you a few announcements. We are recording the session, so please be aware that the session is being recorded. And we are also streaming live on our social media platforms and on YouTube. And we're also sharing the conversations on social media. So we invite you to join the conversation. The hashtag is Grasp Fellowship, so please tweet away. Do feel free to tag us in your tweets. My colleagues will be dropping our handles on the chat. And so please feel free to tag us and we will tag you back. The chat function is open for you to use throughout the event. So please feel free to share your questions, your views, your inputs. And you can start by telling us who you are and where you're joining us from today. We'd like to know who is in the room and where you are joining us from. And we will be glad to engage you. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd like to get to how the program will run for the next 1.5 hours or so. We will be mainly concentrating on discussions around policy and gender responsive policies for agriculture and food systems. And we are organizing this webinar in the context of a new fellowship that is being implemented by award, the Gender Responsive Agriculture Systems Policy Fellowship, the GRASP Fellowship. We call it the GRASP Fellowship. The GRASP Fellowship is funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. And this fellowship was announced at the UN Food Systems Summit last year in New York in September. We launched the fellowship, the call for the first cohort of the fellowship this year in April. That's when we announced the first call that was targeting 3 countries, Nigeria, Malawi, and Zambia. And we've currently expanded the call to 4 additional countries. So the call is currently open to 4 additional countries. That is Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite our director, Dr. Susan Kaaria, the award director, who's going to tell us more about GRASP and to give us welcome remarks. Thank you, Susan. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doreen. It is definitely my pleasure to make some remarks at this policy dialogue. And thank you very much for joining us. I see the numbers are going up. What I'll do is I would like to tell you a little bit about award, what we do, and then I'll talk a little bit about why does award believe it's important to promote gender responsiveness in policies. And then I'll mention a little bit about the GRASP Fellowship. So award, the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, was founded in 2008 and as a career development program that really sought to widen the pipeline of confident, capable, and influential African women scientists in leadership positions in the ARD sector. And why should we worry about widening the pipeline? What we have found is that female participation drops with career progression in ARD institutions, and this phenomenon is called as the leaking pipeline. So when you're getting ready to bring on board women in leadership, they're not there because there are none that are ready. So, and there's many reasons why women drop out of science careers or in the ARD. It's mostly to do with workplace issues, societal issues, or even cultural challenges facing women. So since 2008, we have really developed our experience in widening this pipeline. We do this through career development programs that focus on equipping women with leadership skills and increasing their visibility and networks. But we are also working to build, to support agriculture research institutions themselves to deliver on their mandates in a gender responsive way. We work at 3 levels, and I've talked a little bit about the individual level, where we have our flagship award fellowship, where we offer tailored career development fellowships. Women apply competitively, very much like the GRASP fellowship. And then once they are selected, we enhance their science skills so that they're able to contribute. We advance their leadership, their scientific, their networks. But we're also working at the institutional level. We have a fellowship, we have a program called the Gender Responsive Agriculture Research and Development, where really focusing on enhancing the capacity of African ARD institutions to integrate gender into their institutional policies and practices, and also their capacities in integrating gender in the research design, in implementation, and in dissemination. And finally, we also work at the enabling environment level. And this is where the new fellowship, the award, the GRASP, really allows award to engage at the enabling environment level. And the GRASP fellowship is targeting women in policy and aiming to enhance their skills in designing and implementing agricultural and food systems policies that are gender responsive. So why should we worry about gender responsiveness in policy? First of all, it's very clear shocks such as the COVID pandemic, climate change, and conflict have brought to sharp focus the fragility of our food systems. The COVID pandemic disrupted our food supply chains, resulted in increased food prices, impacting on the economy as a whole, on food production, on input supply. And the most recent report that has come out of the Rome UN agencies, it's called the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2022 report. It's called the SOFI report. Says that hunger has been increasing from 2019 to 2020 in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. But further, in 2021, hunger has continued to rise in these regions. So for example, in Africa now, there were 278 million people facing hunger in 2021. The SOFI report also finds that the gender gap in food insecurity has widened substantially under the shadow of the COVID pandemic. And in particular, in 2021, 31.9% of women in the world were moderately to severely food insecure, compared to 27.6% of men. So what these statistics tell us, and when we take them into Africa, what we know is that Africa's food systems are now more strained than ever. Food is more expensive, people have less money to purchase food, and countries have been unable to import food, as we know, and local food production has been severely affected. So if we look at that, we also realize that there are substantial gender inequalities in African agriculture. So whilst women really play an important role and contribute substantially to agriculture, they face lots of challenges and constraints in terms of accessing productive resources, input, services, markets, assets, and opportunities. But what we have found out from all the evidence is that gender equality and empowering rural women is an essential element in achieving food security and nutrition and eradicating poverty, and of course, leaving no one behind. So closing the gender gap in agriculture, we know can generate lots of benefits to households, to societies as a whole. But for that to happen and to address those gender inequalities, policies have an important role to play. We know policy reforms can eliminate gender-based discrimination and promote equal access to resources, to services, technologies, market opportunities, allowing men and women to equally participate and benefit from the opportunities in agri-food systems. and that the empowerment of women farmers requires the changes in policy that are needed, but it also, of course, requires changes in the practice, the culture, the staffing of ARD institutions. And our newest fellowship, the Gender Responsive Agriculture Systems Policy, the GRASP Fellowship, which is funded by USAID, really responds to this challenge. The fellowship was announced, as Doreen said, at the UN Food Systems Summit in September 2021. And it's a 3-year non-residential career development program that's targeting African women interested in policymaking and working in the agriculture and food systems arena. And the fellowship, as I said, aims to enhance the skills of these women in policymaking, their skills in designing agriculture and food systems policies in a gender responsive way. And our aim is to grow a pool of confident and capable African women who can lead policy changes to improve the livelihoods of smallholder women and men farmers. As you've heard, it is going to be in 7 countries. 3 countries is where we launched first, the Malawi, Nigeria, and Zambia. And now we've expanded it to 4 more countries, as you've heard, to Ghana, Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda. And we're excited to have this webinar to give you more information, to encourage you to apply for this fellowship. And I won't say much more because my colleague, Michèle, the Deputy Director for Award, is going to come in much later to give you much more details about the fellowship, what are the expectations, how you'll benefit, but also how to apply. Thank you very much and welcome to this policy dialogue. Over to you, Doreen.
Thank you very much, Susan, for the welcome remarks and indeed for shining a light on the state of the food systems in Africa. We've heard that the food systems are now more strained than ever. We are hearing that the supply chains have been disrupted. So really the state of the food systems in Africa is there's more hunger, particularly want to focus on the finding from the SOFI report that indicates that there's more hunger, and we have close to 300 million people in Africa are more hungry now. And that policy reforms can eliminate some of these barriers and inequalities that we are facing and enable more men and women smallholders to equally participate and benefit from agriculture. And so based on that, I want to invite our participants today to really share with us their input and their views about the policy priorities, because what we are hearing is that there's an imperative to focus on gender equality, and that policy reforms and policies are one way through which we can achieve that reform or that equality, our bid towards attaining gender equality. And so I'm welcoming you to tell us, what do you think, or what do you consider as the most important policy priorities in addressing gender inequalities? If you can tell us this, the chat function is open, and my colleagues have dropped a link to the Menti link, where we have the question for you to tell us your views. What do you consider as the most important policy priorities in addressing gender inequalities in agriculture? Please speak to us. We want to hear from you as we get into the next segment of the program that will involve us talking to a policy expert from Kenya, and want to try and unpack some of these issues. We want to hear more about policies and the policy change processes. We want to hear about evidence-based policies. And so as we go into the next session, where we'll be talking to my next speaker, whom I'll introduce shortly, please indulge us. There's a link on the charts, a Menti link. Tell us about the policy priorities. We have also outlined the 8 policy priority areas that were identified from the consultations of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. And we want to hear from you what you think are the policy priority areas. Again, the chat function is open. Do feel free to tell us who you are and where you're joining us. And I'll also reiterate that we are streaming live, and we are also sharing these conversations on social media. So do feel free to tweet and tag us in the conversations. Do feel free to share the conversations. on Twitter as we share this with the audience that wasn't able to join us live. Now, I want to introduce my next speaker, Dr. Lilian Kirimi. Dr. Lilian Kirimi is a senior research fellow with the Tegemeo Institute. Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development in Kenya. I'm proud to say that Lilian is also an award fellow. Yeah, we are proud to see our award fellows. And so this also gives you a glimpse of what to expect once you join as an award policy fellow. Lilian is one of the pioneer award fellows from our flagship award fellowship. Those who are familiar with our fellowship programs will know that our flagship initiative was the award fellowship. Lilian, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Doreen. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So we are talking about policies, and Susan has really set the tone and given us an overview of the situation, how the situation is, and the need to have policy reforms as one of the ways through which we can achieve gender equality, or at least we can get closer to gender equality and enable both men and women farmers to benefit and to participate and equally benefit from agricultural production or agricultural food systems. What do you mean by policies and policy change?
Thank you, Doreen, for that question. And hello, everyone on this webinar. Yes, indeed, I'm happy to have been an award fellow in 2010. And now going to your question, Doreen, about policies. I think policy is one of those terms that has very many definitions, depending on where you're looking at the issue from. But I think in general, we can say that policy refers to a standard set of principles that guide a course of action. And so the principles are key in determining what course of action needs to be taken. But so that's in a very broad sense. But when we think about policy as we use the word on a day-to-day basis, we are thinking of things like laws, legislation, regulations, procedures, even administrative actions that are taken to guide a course of action. And these policies could be coming from governments or other institutions. But I think most of us, when we think about policy, what comes to mind is public policy. And public policies are those that are established by governments. Many of them, or rather I would say, those public policies are legally binding. And so it's expected that individuals and institutions, both in the public and private space, will comply with the regulations or the policies. But we also have policies that established or created by institutions or organizations in the private sector. Those are also important, although they don't perhaps carry the force of law like the public policies. They are critical, and in institutions, it's required that individuals comply with such policies, of course, to ensure that the institutions are running as expected. So it's important that we realize that policy is not just in the public space, although that's what we mainly encounter or we think about. So we talk of legislation, those are the laws in place, statutory laws that are created by legislative bodies. We also have the regulations. Usually those are actions or laws that tend to bring specificity to policies. They describe some details that could be in the broad legislation. But we also have aspects of policy, again, in the public space that can come from judicial opinions. The judiciary can also establish policies. So policy, I would say, in a very broad sense, would want to think of it as those issues that laws, the regulations, the plans and actions that are undertaken to achieve certain goals in a society. I think that's the way I would like to look at policy. And so coming to your question on policy change, so a change in these aspects that we have mentioned about policy, whether it's a law, a regulation, an administrative action, a change in that, then is what we can define as a policy change. And the change, maybe looking at that again in a very broad sense, we can have what we could call major changes, where the policy shift is manifested in major ways. For example, you may think of if we find in the agriculture sector, perhaps that climate change and issues of resilience are critical when we think about food systems. Maybe one of the major things we can do is introduce a national agriculture insurance scheme. That's a major change. Maybe if I speak from the Kenyan perspective, because we don't have a national agriculture insurance scheme. But we could also have a minor change where we see just incremental shifts, small shifts. For example, if we would want to encourage the use of technologies or innovations that help to deal with resilience in agriculture, perhaps it could mean changing or altering the tax rates to ensure that the people that are engaged in the food systems can, for example, access funding better, or change tax rates. So if they're importing items that they need in their production or their processing aspects, then that helps in terms of being able to access whatever they need. So it can be, as I said, policy can include a big shift or just a minor adjustment, but in whichever case, that's a policy change. Over to you, Doreen.
Thank you very much, Lilian, for that overview of policies and policy change. What I'm hearing is that policies involve a certain course of action. You told us that this could be a guiding principles that would lead to a certain course of action, yeah, or a certain change. What I'm hearing also is that policies and the policy change would involve multiple actors. You say that, yes, we look at the public sphere, but then it involves multiple actors. And so when we talk about policy change and if we needed to effect a certain program or a certain, we need to take a certain course of action, who do we need to involve in this process when you talk about policy change? What are the fundamental people or the people who should be involved in this process?
Thank you, Doreen. Again, yes, that's again another broad question. I would start by saying that policy and policy formulation processes are indeed very complex. And so they would involve multiple factors, would need to have considerations, including feasibility considerations, stakeholder interests, political issues. Of course, political economy is a key issue when we think about policy and policy changes. And I would think that since it's broad, it's complex, there are many, I would say there are many actors that we need to involve. There are many people we need to involve because policy in itself has facets of interests, ideas, there are institutions to consider, there are networks. And when we think about networks. We're thinking about actors that are involved in the policy-making space, their relationships amongst themselves, and the structures that are formed by those relationships. So that's a critical aspect that we need to consider in terms of players. There are also players that have interests, ideas, new ideas coming, emerging issues, and all the other things like shifts in the balance of interest and power. So those are considerations that we make in when we think about changes in policy. So who are the people that we need to involve? I think the best way of looking at that is to think about the policy cycle. A policy is, as I said, is complex, is really not a linear thing. So, I think the best way to think about it is in terms of a policy cycle. And the policy cycle, again, people will describe it in different ways, but I think one of the most common is to think about the 5 stages of the policy cycle. There's the agenda setting, that's the first one. There's the design of the policy, the adoption, implementation, and then finally evaluation and reform. And at each of these stages, there are critical players that we need to consider, because their role is important in determining what the change we want to have in place. For instance, if you're thinking about the first stage of agenda setting, this is where we need to talk about the issues. What issues do we want to have in place? What are our priorities? And at that point, there are definitely actors we call the powerful advocates. Those that are advocating for a given change. And we need to bring them on board. Now, the advocates will vary depending on the issue at hand, but these could be from the government sector, private sector, the civil society, could be researchers themselves that have found issues that they need to bring onto the table. And so they set the agenda in terms of articulating a problem. So those are critical people, the powerful advocates for a given change. And at the adoption stage, I would think, again, there are also other actors that are critical. At that level, we think of actors that could be either opponents or proponents of a given change. So you need to balance the views of these actors, bring them on board. What are the proponents saying? What are the opponents saying? How do we deal with this? And in that mix, we need also to remember the government has a key role to play. We have government veto players. That's how we think about them within the policy cycle. And these have ultimate decision making power. So we need to consider them, because we may come up with a problem, articulate it well, but that needs to have the backing also of the political and the leadership group. But again, when we go to the implementation aspect stage of the policy, we are thinking about the people that are going to implement that policy. Who could they be? It could be the private sector, it could be the public sector. So you're thinking about the institutions and the capacity those institutions have and the people that will need to do the implementation. The private sector is key. We need to understand their willingness and their capacity to implement a given policy. More often than not, we have public policies that indicate how things need to be done, but the people that are actually going to implement the policy are usually the private sector. So we need to understand them and their willingness and their capacity to implement a given policy. We need to identify who are the policy champions during implementation, because those are very critical to ensure that the policy in place or program goes as planned. They have an interest to ensure it works. But of course, the others who are watching, perhaps those that were not supporting a given change, they will be watching to see whether indeed it's working. And in terms of at the last stage of evaluation and reform, an area that perhaps we forget is that there are also players that are interested to see what are the impacts of the policy, of the program, or the reform. What are the impacts? What have we learned? What is the effectiveness? What's the reach of this change? So in terms of players, Doreen, I think there are many, and I think the best way to think about them is that they cut across the 5 stages of the policy cycle, and they also cut across different spaces, from the public sector to the private sector, and different combinations thereof. There will be the civil society, the NGOs, the donor institutions also have a role to play in terms of policy. Over to you, Doreen.
Thank you, Lilian. I think for me, my point here is that, yes, you say there are multiple actors and we need to consider what role each actor is going to play. But ultimately, I think it goes to what's the need are we solving? What is policy?
Doreen, have we lost you?
Seems we can't hear her.
Yeah, Doreen, I think we've lost you a bit. Are you back?
Can you hear me?
Now you can, yeah.
I think you'll have to repeat the question, Doreen.
Yes, please.
Maybe as Doreen gets back, I think if I picked a few words, Lilian, she wanted to ask something about what type of evidence and research is needed to support government and other stakeholders in the agriculture sector.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can go with that as we wait for her to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, the evidence that is needed for the government to support the agriculture sector is also broad. I would say the key important thing is that policy should be based on the best available research evidence. And that is based on empirical findings and not just anecdotal evidence. Because remember, the changes that policy ascribes will have far-reaching effects. And so it's important that we have those policies or policy changes grounded in good evidence. But as we think about that, we also need to be alive to the fact that evidence is not, we don't always have evidence that we need to make decisions. For example, if we are facing an emerging issue, if we think about the issue we faced in this region in terms of the fall armyworm, when that became an issue, we didn't have real evidence on how to deal with it, because it was a new issue, an emerging issue. And at that point, the research evidence to support policy solutions was definitely limited. But with time, of course, now we have a body of literature, information that will help us understand how to deal with such an issue. So although we say that we need evidence, empirical evidence, we need to understand that the strength of that evidence may vary across the issues we are talking about and also may change over time, like the case I have highlighted about the fall armyworm issue.
Yeah.
But the evidence we need, again, I would want to link it to those 5 stages of the policy cycle. Because at each of those stages, the information needed differs and may be provided by different players, different researchers in different institutions and who have different focus. For example, at the agenda setting stage, the important thing there is to think about setting priorities, articulating the issues, the problems, the challenges. So if in agriculture, we are thinking about the low agriculture productivity or gender differences in agriculture productivity, we need to be to have statistics, data that articulates that problem. How severe is this problem? Where do we find it? Where does it occur? And if we are thinking about gender differences and having information on how those differences play out. So we can use existing data, statistics from researchers, from various organizations, and even the national statistical offices will have information that can help us set our priorities or articulate the problems that we need to address. But having articulated that, then we need more data to help us understand the underlying determinants of the identified problem or challenge. For instance, that case of low ag productivity. What could be contributing to that? Okay. We can look at it from different aspects. Economists will go into that and come up with issues that they think would be affecting agricultural productivity. Perhaps could be input use, access to information and credit, climate change, affecting resilience and affecting the changes, the variations in productivity across time. But also even scientists will say, okay, the varieties in use perhaps are not suited to the current climate conditions and issues like that. So we need information to understand those underlying determinants. And it's out of that information, out of the recommendations that researchers come up with, that now we are able to provide policy options. So the evidence needed for policy comes from that kind of research where you're understanding the determinants. How do they link up? How do these determinants interact? We'll say, are they reinforcing each other? Are they competing? And so we provide policy options, and then the policy makers decide this is the area we want to invest in. And not just maybe providing those options, we can also help rank or prioritize the options that we have provided. So it makes it easier for the policymakers to pick one or two things to invest in so that they can change the course of action so that we can address the determinants that may be affecting productivity. That's the example I gave. And at the implementation stage.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, Lilian, I was going to say thank you. And because time is running a little bit and there are some questions in the chat, we want to maybe you to respond to one or two real questions as I pose the next question. But one of the questions in the chat says, how do we enhance the cooperation or coordination of the different stakeholders to enhance policy, e.g. the public and private sector actors or the donors and their recipients?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
and you can go through it quickly so that we have a second one, and then we give time to the others. Yeah, okay.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Coordination, the policy space, and the things that works well in terms of coordination is building coalitions or partnerships. And I think in the agriculture space, we have seen multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder fora where all the players come together. So we have a forum where you have donors, the government, the private sector, the civil society represented in a coalition, in a forum where they discuss issues and then they are able to identify what the issue is, how to deal with the issue, and who will deal with it so that they can come up with solutions. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much for that. I think that's a good quick answer, and coalitions and partnership, I think, is a key word in policy. The next question is, how do you measure impact, evidence building of policy work having in mind reforms or policy change takes long? I think this is an important question to all of us.
Yeah, Dorothy, can you read the question again?
It's something to do with measuring impact. How do you measure impact of policy work, knowing that reforms or policy change takes long? You know, the whole process is such a long, I'm sure with the experience, you know, it takes long to get a policy through. So how do you measure the impact?
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. That's a good question, and not an easy one to maybe address, given that rider there, that policy changes and if impacts of policy changes take long to see. And so to measure the impacts, I think one of the things that is critical is to understand that impact could be the long-term outcomes that perhaps we expect to see. And those may take long, given, as we have said, the time span of policy and policy changes. But I think one way of trying to even indicate that we are in the right direction is during implementation. We can collect data for monitoring. So at implementation stage, monitoring to check whether we are on the right track or we need to take a corrective action to ensure that we will get to the intended outcomes in the long term. So that's during implementation. But in the long term, we need to, after a policy has been in place, a program is done, and we want to find out the impacts, the effectiveness, and the reach. We can do that at the end, and that's where evaluation becomes important. And there are methods of doing that. There are metrics of doing that, depending on what it is you want to measure. What impact do you want to measure? Is it in productivity change over the time? Is it change in nutrition? And when you talk of nutrition, is it for women? Is it for children? What aspect of nutrition are you focusing on? And different metrics and methodologies will answer different questions. So to measure, it's so critical that we have clear evaluation questions. What do we really want to measure? So it's a broad question, but I would want to say it's possible to measure, but we need to be clear on what we want to measure and when.
Yeah. Okay. your presentation or questions has triggered so many questions. And I just want to reassure the participants that we are going to revisit some of those questions, and some of them we are going to type them in the chat. But we wanted to change gear a little bit so that we give the other speaker some time. I don't know whether Doreen is back and whether Seth is in the house, because I didn't see him on the list. Otherwise, we wanted to focus a little bit more on the GRASP fellowship itself. Doreen, I see you, so maybe I put it back to you so that you take it from here.
Yes, Seth is not in, so we are going straight to Michèle. We can see the questions in the chat. Please keep posting your questions. Do not use the chat function for the questions so that it's easy for us to monitor the questions. Kindly post your questions on the Q&A section so that we're able to monitor, and we'll try to respond to all the questions that you pose as much as we can. A kind reminder, even as we welcome the next speaker, that we are also inviting your input on the policy priority areas. There's a link on the chat or to Menti. Kindly visit that link and give us your views. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Michèle Mbo'o-Tchouawou. Dr. Michèle Mbo'o-Tchouawou is our Deputy Director in charge of programs. Welcome, Michèle. Michèle is going to give us an overview of GRASP and really talk to us about what GRASP is hoping to achieve and the process. Welcome, Michèle.
Thank you, Doreen, and greetings to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for making time to attend this virtual policy dialogue. As you can see, Lilian and Susan have already set the scene, showing us how we should really think about the issues that matters when it comes to agricultural policy. We've also kind of zoomed in on why agricultural policy and using a gender responsive lens to it, and what clear agenda do we have for implementation and results in various regions in our continent. So definitely that's where the Gender Responsive Agricultural System Policy Fellowship comes in. And it is our big emphasis and one of the main reasons for us to engage today with you and others who are listening from different social media platforms. So what is this GRASP? This GRASP is what we call the Gender Responsive Agricultural System Policy Fellowship. This is our newest capacity development initiative. As you know, this is where our niche is. We're trying to build the capacity, not only for women, but different actors at different levels. But for this specific initiative, we are looking at targeting African women in the agricultural policy sphere. Why targeting these women in particular? Our mandate, as you know, is for us to continue to explore and expand on women's empowerment in various areas related to agriculture and food security. Policy making, of course, plays a very critical role in all the different dimensions, spheres of our economic development, political, cultural, socioeconomic development in the continent. However, as it has been said already here, we've seen very little that has happened, or we've seen different level of policy engagement, if I can put it that way. And the actual implementation of these policy interventions has not really helped us see sound and sustainable results on the ground. And through this initiative to GRASP, we are seeing an opportunity to really rethink or revisit how we want to approach our policy design and development, and what needs to be also included in that process. And one of the things that we are good at is really to bring in the part on gender integration in the process, and particularly putting women, policy practitioners at the heart of these processes. It is therefore our hope that through this GRASP initiative, we can start working with a critical mass of women policy experts, not just women, but also other seasoned senior policy practitioners, because we see there are a lot of synergies that we can create in terms of mobilizing and engaging a broad range of stakeholders so that we can navigate these complex dimensions, policy dimensions and orientations in agri-food systems. We've seen all that Lilian just explained to us. We have been able to think about it from different angles. She talked about nutrition, gender equality, agriculture, productivity, and so many other contexts that we need to factor in this process. We also see these women expert, policy experts, coming together to build and strengthen their capacity at different levels. This would be through peer-to-peer learning and exchange among themselves, but also other practitioners, so that we can really sit and identify, address the common challenges, and also look into the opportunities for effective policy change. I think this is timely, and we need to think of it as something that we want to see happening and changing the overall policy environment. And of course, we want to see how we can also be able to work with the selected women policy practitioners to support and design policies that are better targeted, and that will also stimulate the collective action towards gender responsive agri-food systems in Africa. As I said at the beginning, the fellowship targets primarily African women policy professionals. We call them in this fellowship policy fellows. And who will qualify it as these policy fellows? We have heard today that the issues are so broad and that they touch to different dimensions. That's why we've also opened up. As much as we look at the agricultural sector, we are looking at specifically our government, our national policy systems, our social and international development field, the private sector itself, the civil society, the policy think tank, and even the academia. How are all these women from these different contexts come together with different level of expertise to really tackle the policy issues in the agricultural sector? We're also looking at a certain level of expertise. We've talked about 8 to 10 years in the policy field, working at different levels. It could be national, regional, or continental level, because all at these different levels, we have policy frameworks that matters and which we need to consider in the different processes. We see the selected women being actively involved in this policy framework, and particularly the issues of agricultural development, gender equality, and food systems. With our donors, and that it has already been mentioned, we've also thought that it will be great if we start with a first set of countries, learn lessons from the implementation at that level before we can open up to other countries. And that's why we have launched the fellowship with only a few countries, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, Rwanda, Uganda, and Zambia. And that's why you can see that for now, the fellowship will be focused on these 7 countries that we have for the first phase of the GRASP fellowship. So the policy fellows will not be working alone in this GRASP fellowship. They will definitely be interacting and collaborating extensively with other stakeholders who will also benefit in the fellowship in different ways. We are thinking at different group of experts or junior policy professionals. So they come in different capacities. The senior policy experts will be serving as mentors to the policy fellows. We see them ensuring the learning, that this learning is effective and that it focuses on the relevant skills and competencies that will be required for the policy fellows to really put together this draft policy and be able to talk about them, to sell them, to pitch them, and to also get momentum for the implementation of these policies. Then we have the other group, the junior policy professionals who on their part will be serving as the mentees to the policy fellows. They will be working very closely with the fellows so that they can be thinking through innovative policy response. We know that there are challenges, but where are the opportunities? That's where we want these duos to come in, look at what are the persistent socioeconomic challenges facing our society, particularly our smallholder farmers, our local communities, and to some extent to the society as a whole. So there is a lot that we want to see coming from these trios of policy fellows, senior policy experts serving as mentors, and junior policy professionals serving as mentees to the policy fellows. But what will they be doing in the program? We see them involved in three main work package or interventions. First, we are looking at this as an opportunity for us to really build constituencies of support and networking. It is one thing to be able to develop policies. It is another thing to really get the necessary buy-in for the consideration first, and then the processes for implementing a policy. So for us, really getting a large pool of people who can support and help us network around the agricultural policy landscape is very key in this process. We therefore see the policy fellows continuously engaging with the various actors and partners so that they can understand better the evolving African policy landscape. Beyond that, we are also looking into how we are going to equip them with the necessary skills for them to be able to get out there and pitch their policy, their draft policy, and even get buy-in from different authorities here and there. So their award will be offering learning opportunities to the policy fellows, to the mentors, to the mentees, and this in a way to kind of help them get key insight of the mechanisms of African agricultural policy development, and also where we need to think about the agenda setting when we are also looking into the efforts that would be necessary to drive the actions at different levels and the impact. So we are looking at also how we support the various participants in the GRASS Fellowship with what is at the heart of award capacity building model, which is mentoring. We are looking into using this opportunity to really re-engage our participants with the issues of mentoring as a unique opportunity for development, for leveraging and capitalizing for mutual learning, supporting growth, and also showing the path to success. What will that mean for the mentors and what will that mean for the mentees is what we also want to gather as part of this initiative. At the policy level, what will that change if I'm being mentored or not? What will I gain from my mentor's networks, for instance, and what will my mentor also get from me? Are things that we really want to see happening as part of the mentoring programs that we will be delivering in this fellowship program. We will also be supporting the policy fellows in building leadership and negotiation skills. We do believe that when we think about a complex processes like policy making and implementation, it is important that we nurture these skills, that we develop a different level of soft skill that will help us communicate and act effectively in different situations, be able to explore techniques that will help us convince people in different places, and learn also how we can influence and navigate different politics to achieve the desired outcomes and impact. Another big thing in the GRASS Fellowship is how we are going to develop practice for outcome and impact. It is one thing to get the skills, but it's another thing to also practice them. And for us, we know that the building capacity for policy is a long journey, but we need to start from somewhere. So how do we nurture this process? How do we bring in the team, the participants to be a dynamic community of policy practitioners who can not only share their milestones, their learnings, their achievements, but they can actually be working together on specific projects. And this project, we want them not only to be projects that we're going to do during the time of the GRASS Fellowship, but that these are projects that will not only give them hands-on practice, but also start forging how they see policies and how these policies could be implemented at different levels. So this part on developing the specific project with the mentors and the mentee is very key in this whole process. It is our hope that before we can close the first cohort, we are able to have policy projects that are different level of design, implementation, because we do also recognize that we're not starting with all the same level of development in these different issues. So we hope also that this will be like a source of inspirations for others who will want to join the program later, and that we can make a real difference for our communities, but also be able to change the narrative when it comes to engaging with our policy framework up there, and all these authorities that are waiting for us to learn from us what are the issues and how we can tackle them. So definitely for us, it is important that we get participants who are really passionate about the issues of policy, gender in agriculture, in the agricultural sector, but also all the related sectors around that, because we know there is no way we can be healthy if we've not eaten. There is no way that we can be energized if we are not getting the resources that we need for this to happen. So we want the participants to come with very innovative and original ideas, policy ideas that will really make this work move, and also help us really get to a place where it is not things as usual. we are really coming to say, yes, hunger has been there. There is hope that we are going to solve the issues, but how best can we do that? And if we can do that, what are the mechanisms that we can put in place to ensure that this happens? And how do we follow up with the relevant authorities to ensure that this happens, not maybe today, but in the years to come? So it is work in progress, and we're not going to stop at any point. So definitely, as you are coming to this fellowship, we want you to go to our website, look into our eligibility criteria, apply, and propose us your best innovative policy ideas, which will be reviewed by our selection committee. We are currently reviewed for the first cohort, and we will be doing the same for those who will be applying from Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya. The call is still on up till end August, and we really look forward to receiving as many applications as possible. And please feel free to engage us via email, and we will be able to respond to any questions that you will be having about the application at this point. Thank you so much, and I'm here to answer any question you may have on the GRASP Fellowship. Thank you, and over to you, Doreen.
Sharing about GRASP, I'm sure that our audience now have better idea, clear picture about whom we are targeting in terms of the award policy fellows. If I can just summarize in one sentence, from what you've said, is that we are looking for passionate policy professionals who can suggest game-changing solutions for our food systems. And so we are inviting questions about the fellowship itself, as Michèle has shared. I'm seeing your questions on the chat. We have posted the link to the call for the GRASP Fellowship, the one that is currently open and is closing at the end of this month. The link is there. You can go into the website and interact with the call. There's also some 2 documents that you can interact with. There's a brochure that has more information about the GRASP Fellowship. And there's also a document that has some questions that we've been receiving if you want to know more. But the call is currently open. Are you the one that we are looking for? Please feel free to apply, share with us your questions. But I think something else that Michèle has mentioned is that we are also we are targeting award policy fellows from this call, but they will be paired with a seasoned policy practitioner whom we refer to as mentors. Maybe you are that mentor. Yeah, and so I'll go right to the questions right now. I can see a few questions about the policy processes in general. A question from Chris, a question from Edna. We will get to you. For now, I want to respond to the questions that are directly related to the fellowship and the application process. There's a question from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, yesterday I tried to access the application from the GRASP Fellowship and I was unable to access it on your website. It could not open. Have you tried accessing the link that we've currently posted? We posted on the chat. Please try and you can get in touch with us. There's an email address there also for anybody who's experiencing difficulties. Do feel free to send us an email. Somebody else, Noni, is also asking if there's a possibility to extend the program through a MOOC in the future. Michèle, do you want to respond to that question?
Thank you so much for the question, and I think that's a good one. We are actually exploring all opportunities, and even as we're going to launch the first cohort, I know we have organized for some master classes during that fellowship, this first cohort, and of course we are an evolving institution or organization, and we look forward to bringing in all the opportunities for learning. So we take this, and please be assured that we have that as part of our our thinking process of how best we can make this work. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank you, Michèle. Esther Njuguna is asking, what are the criteria or cutoff for the applicants, mentors and mentees? Great. Okay, so I'm going to direct that question to Michèle. But for the mentees, that is the award policy fellows, the applicants that you are currently targeting, the document on the website has the eligibility criteria. Yeah, if you could feel free to interact with that document, and the link will be posted here again, and you can access the brochure from the website. But Michèle, over to you for the criteria for mentors. If there's anything else you want to say about the mentees as well.
Okay, so for the mentors, as I said already, we are looking into seasoned experts, policy experts in the areas of agriculture, gender, actually combining the different expertise. So we are looking at people who can really be able to bring in these different aspects. Of course, this comes with a certain level of experience, and it has to be more than the 10 years that we had put for the policy experts themselves. Yeah, and for the other part was on the junior professionals. Yeah, the junior professionals. So the junior professionals, we're also looking into people who are in the area of policy, agricultural policy in particular, and also working at different levels. We do want to also have them coming in with a level of experience on policy-related issues. Maybe they've started working on a policy project, and they want to enhance it, and you as the mentor, because you will be the mentor, the policy fellows will be the mentor. You see it as an opportunity, something that you have also been working on, and which will really enhance your efforts to make that policy project move to the next level. So this ability to synergize in the work that you're doing in policy and what your mentee will be doing is also something that we want to see. So they need to come with a certain level of expertise also in the fellowship. So about 5 to 6 years for the mentees is what we are looking into, and for the mentors we are looking into something around 15 years of expertise, people who have been able to design policies before and who have also been able to advocate for gender and policy development at different levels. It's also very key in this project. Of course, remember that they will be supporting you with the policy project. So definitely they should be able to show that they've done some work in that area before, and maybe being able to implement some of their policy projects in their work.
Thank you, Michèle. I just want to clarify that when Michèle is talking about mentees, she's talking about the third component of the mentoring model, that is the junior policy professional who comes in after the award policy fellow has been selected. When she mentioned the 5 to 6 years in experience, that is whom she's referring to. The policy fellows, we require a minimum of 10 years experience. And of course, the seasoned ones, the mentors, that's where she's talking about 15 years experience. There's a question.
Maybe I can just add there, Doreen.
Go ahead, yes, please.
The policy fellows are actually at the center. So there is a senior expert to whom the policy fellow will be a mentee. And then there will be a junior policy expert to whom the policy fellows will be a mentor. So at some point, the policy fellows will play both the role of the mentee and the mentor.
Thank you, Michèle. I see no more questions about the application process itself. Do feel free to bring them in once if you have any questions about the application process. Maybe we can now.
There's one on extension. Is there a possibility to extend the program through a? Oh, okay.
We've responded to that, to
okay.
that one already, yes. Thank you, Dorothy. Maybe I can bring in Lilian now.
Doreen,
somebody was,
I think, yes,
sorry,
I think there's still a question. Dorothy, you are right. On the mock extension, someone was asking, that's Noni, asking about extension to other countries, including South Africa, which is a bit different from the previous one. Let me just say for now, we don't have visibility on the countries. We work with our donors, and for each phases, we will be agreeing on the countries that will be coming in the fellowship. So what we have already is what you have seen. It is our hope that we can definitely extend to more countries, and we will be pushing for that in different ways, but we also need to recognize different other things that we need to think about with in collaboration with our donors in this process. So for now, no South Africa, but hopefully we'll have in the future.
That's right. Thank you, Michèle. Now we are getting to the tail end of the conversation today, but
I think we've lost Doreen again. Doreen, we cannot hear you.
She's disconnected, I think.
I believe if Doreen doesn't come back, I believe, Lilian, you had some chance to see some of the questions, the general questions. But if not, I think just a summary of the key highlights based on your presentation and what you're hearing from the feedback. I think as we come towards the end, I don't know what Doreen was going to ask, but I want to put that as a way of summarizing.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. Yes, I saw a question on the chat. I was actually responding to it, but now I can share it here. The question was on tools one can use to interest policymakers in the research interventions. A good question, and I think researchers, we are always dealing with this question of how do we get to interest the policymakers. And I think one way is maybe to begin to understand that there's a very critical role of being able to translate research to policy. And that takes some skills, it takes some strategies. I was glad to hear about GRASP, that there will be training of the fellows to be able to pitch. Those are some of the words that Michèle was using: pitch, engage with policymakers. And it's important that we are able to address that space of research policy translation. And to be able to do that, I think, just following on what Michèle said, is training the fellows or the researchers in general to be able to first ask the right policy questions. Our research, is it addressing the relevant policy questions? I think that's very important. So if we don't have the training, we can do that. understanding the steps of the policy process, the politics of the process itself, and how to engage with policymakers. It's important that it's not just the tools we are using, but there are also the strategies like getting the right training. But I also think that one of the strategies is to create awareness among the policymakers on the need to appreciate and use science. But once we have come with evidence, how then do we, what tools do we use? I think the important is here emphasizing packaging the evidence in a way that addresses the policymakers. We've been challenged to provide very brief information, policy briefs. We've been challenged to go further and just have a 3-minute, 1-minute, 2-minute pitch to be able to say exactly what your research findings are and interest a policymaker to take a specific action. So there's the bit of the researcher or the fellow to be able to articulate the findings and what needs to be done. But more importantly, is a need to build the coalitions I think I mentioned earlier, but to create buy-in networks. And where possible, I think just stepping back a little bit, when we are conceptualizing an issue, a problem, it's good to engage policymakers where it's possible so that our research addresses the needs of the policymakers. If we address the needs, then they'll be buy-in. Then we can carry the policymakers along with us as we do the research, and they'll be more receptive to the findings at the end of our research. So I think it's not just tools we need, but we need clear strategies on how to do it from the beginning of our research as we formulate the research to the end as we disseminate the information. So that's very critical, but emphasizing that translation of research to policy. Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah, and thank you, Lilian, for that, for a very good summary. Yeah, we are aware, but now more aware how policy is a bit complex, but how we can tackle that, the different players. We know it takes long, takes place at various levels, and the importance of engaging the policymakers themselves so that we can get buy-in and the tools that we use. Because these participants here today are potential applicants or they know people who might apply. So I think these interactions that we're having today is so important for us to understand as we go into this growth fellowship. I'm not sure that Doreen is back. Doreen, are you there? If you're not back, are you there?
I'm back, Dorothy. I'm so sorry. Today is when Murphy's Law decided to be at play. But thank you so much. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Lilian. Lilian responded to the questions that were in the chat, and I haven't seen any more questions about the application process. And so we just want to thank our participants for joining. I'm inviting my colleague Sabina to share with us the results. We had requested if you could give us your input about the policy priorities. I'm inviting Sabina to share with us. We want to hear what you had to say, which of the policy priority areas identified. Okay. The first question, okay. What do you consider as the most important policy priority in addressing gender inequalities in agriculture? Okay, women's voice, participation, and leadership in agriculture. We also had people who talked about policies that respond to all stakeholders and their unique needs and not just women. Very important. Policy for pastoralists and agro-pastoralists with regard to water and food security. Solutions that avoid crises such as climate or food crisis exacerbate gender inequality. There's also somebody talking about land ownership rights that take women into consideration. Access to land, access to credit facilities, access and ownership of family and community land. So land is recurring here. Access to finances that are not tied to collaterals, as most small-scale producers do not have access to this collateral. Participation of women and men on the ground. What I'm seeing here is there's, if I can cluster these ones, there's a lot of people talking about land, people talking about access to facilities, it's also recurring, and the issue of equal participation. There's also national gender policy for agricultural sector, where we are currently developing to ensure all interventions, both by the public and private sector, are gender responsive. The policy will be domesticated by the counties. I think this is a case of a particular country. I wish this person had indicated which country this is. Thank you so much for your input. Let's go to the second question. We had requested you to rank the policies that were identified by the consultations of the United Nations Food System Summit. Which of these do you think is more urgent? There were 8. The one that has been ranked highly is gender responsive agriculture and food systems policies. And then there are 3 that are tying: access to and control over land, changing norms and addressing institutional barriers, and promoting women's voice, decision-making, and leadership in food systems, which is actually, again, what was coming up in the first question. And then the last one, addressing women's unpaid care and agricultural labor burden. Thank you very much for your participation. We have heard you. I think for the potential award fellows who will be coming in, we also know where they need to sort of be considering and some of the priority areas that they need to be thinking about even as they formulate their policy innovation projects. We have come to the end of our conversation this afternoon, and I'd like to invite our Deputy Director in charge of operations, Dr. Ms. Dorothy Muhebi, to come in and give us the vote of thanks and close for us the webinar. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you. Am I on? Oh, okay.
I can hear you, but we can't see you. Okay, you're going to turn off your video.
Let me leave my video. Maybe I'll put it right at the end for people to see my face, but I don't trust my internet either. Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Doreen, and for all the participants. I just want to thank all of you on behalf of our award. And as you've heard, my name is Dorothy Muhebi, and I'm the Deputy Director at our award for operations. I think it's been a very exciting and interesting session. I think we've learned a lot. And I assume all of us have learned something new on policy or gender in agriculture, but most important about the GRAS Fellowship. I just want to thank you for all the interactions that we've enjoyed. And of course, I want to say a special thank you to our speakers, Dr. Lilian Kirimi of Tegemeo. Most of you know Tegemeo Institute. It's based in Kenya. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I think we all did, in understanding what policies are. It's always such a joy listening to you and sharing your knowledge on policy. So we really want to thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Of course, I can't forget my award colleagues, Dr. Susan Kaaria, for giving us an overview of our award. And apart from that, I think the new participants, not the new participants, but participants in general can now put a face to you as our director. And if I've learned something new about our award, I'm sure everybody else has learned something new. So thank you very much for taking time to also give us that overview on our award. And of course, Michèle, for the very good overview about the fellowship. And I also want to encourage us to continue asking questions even after today. But for now, we just thank you for highlighting the key elements of the award GRAS Fellowship. Our donor who is not able to be here, we just want to appreciate them. And I want to, of course, in particular, thank Dr. Fazana who is our program manager at USAID. We had hoped that she would be with us this morning, afternoon, but due to unavoidable circumstances, she wasn't able to join us, but we want to extend our appreciation to her. And of course, finally, I want to thank all my award colleagues under the leadership of Dr. Susan Kaaria. And special mention, of course, goes to our moderator, Doreen Odongo and her comms team, who quickly put this webinar together. And I just checked, we are very active on social media, and YouTube is also streaming live. So I've seen that. And we just want to thank you for getting us together at this short notice. And I'm sure that the participants, after they leave today, they're going to share the information that we've shared today with their colleagues and friends and other potential participants in the GRASS Fellowship. So thank you all. And with that, I wish all of you a pleasant afternoon or a pleasant morning, depending on where you are. Yeah, thank you very much. And back to you, Doreen.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Without further ado, we have come to the end of our session today. Asante sana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Doreen.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, bye-bye. Paula, Doreen.
Thank you.
But it went very well. Wow.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed listening to Lilian.
Me too.
Great. Yeah.
She's very articulated.
Yeah.
I've listened to her before, but it wasn't really on policy. So she can even give us a seminar.
Yes. We still have